My name is Margaret Cole. I am 71 years old, a retired school headmistress who built a small property company with my late husband and turned it into the mansion my son and his wife brag about to their friends. And tonight I watched my daughter-in-law lean over my bowl of pumpkin soup and spit while my son laughed. Would you believe the sound of their laughter was softer than the splash, like the last mercy of rain on a roof, and yet crueler than any storm I've ever walked through, because it came from the child I nursed through fevers and heartbreaks, the boy I once called my miracle, the same boy who used to bring me daisies from the side of the road. How did we arrive in a kitchen tiled with marble, under gold pendants, with a smell of rosemary and humiliation, and them performing their triumph as if I were a stray dog finally put in its place, you wonder? I had come downstairs in my soft slippers, the ones with the little blue bows, because I still like the way delicate things insist on existing, and I heard them before I saw them, whispering sharp little whispers that cut the air into ribbons, as if they were practicing cruelty like a duet. Aisha, my daughter-in-law with the perfect eyeliner and the tongue that could slice glass, lifted the ladle, glanced at my bowl, and did it slowly, deliberately, as if blessing the food with contempt. The kitchen clock ticked once and I felt time fold back on itself, all the way to a day when I had signed a trust and tucked away my name like a secret gold coin, because my husband always said, "Maggie, a fortress is loveliest when the enemy forgets it has walls." Wasn't it odd that they had forgotten whose house it was? My hands did not shake. Age has steadied me where youth had me trembling, and I watched my son Daniel throw his head back and laugh, the way he used to laugh when he woke to birthday balloons, except now the sound had gravel in it, and he said, "That'll teach her to stay out of our way," as if her were not the woman who kept a picture of his first lost tooth in a silver locket. I looked at the soup, bright orange, flecked with parsley, ruined by a thread of human disrespect, and I placed the spoon down with ceremony, because some endings must be acknowledged like funerals. Have you ever realized, in one breath, that love can be strangled by the same hands it once held? "Eat," Aisha said, soft as satin, the kind of voice that fools a room until it notices the stain, and Daniel leaned on the island with the lazy confidence of a prince who never learned the cost of the crown. I let the silence work for me, as it has in every classroom, every staff room, every boardroom where men thought a grandmother was furniture instead of fire. "No," I said, so gently you could have missed the blade, and I stood, my chair whispering against the tiles, and their eyes narrowed as if the light had suddenly hurt them. Isn't it strange how cruelty expects applause but chokes when the audience stands up and leaves? I reached for the bowl, not to drink insult but to carry it like evidence, and I walked to the sink, tipped the soup into the disposal, and ran the water until it roared, the way a river roars when it remembers it was never a pond. "You'll make another," Aisha said, half command, half test, and Daniel smirked as if he were rehearsing dominance in a mirror, and I thought of the scrapes I cleaned from his knees and the lullabies I sang through layoffs and grief, because love, when it's real, builds even when hands are empty. When did love between a mother and son become a bridge someone else set on fire? I did not answer them. I reached for a clean bowl, set it upside down to dry, and then wiped the counter with slow circles, as if polishing a memory back to clarity. Their confusion cracked first. Abusers get anxious when their script is ignored, and I heard their whispers tangle into frustration. "You think you can defy us here?" Aisha asked, tapping her nails, long, pale pink, immaculate, on the marble, as if the stone itself belonged to her fingers. "What do predators fear more than a calm they can't rattle?" I turned finally and let my eyes meet Daniel's, and I saw a boy I loved wearing a man I didn't recognize, and pain swept through me like winter air through a church door left open after midnight mass. "I taught you to look people in the eye when you break them or when you lift them," I said, and the words sounded like a bell I should have rung years ago, and he looked away first because shame can't hold a gaze. "If a mother's truth is a mirror, why do some sons prefer the dark?" "Enough," he hissed, but the word was smaller than he wanted, and Aisha slid to his side, her perfume a sweet smoke that tried to hide the fire, and she smiled with all her teeth. "You're old, Margaret," she said, "and this house has moved on from sentimental rules. We make the rules now." The funny thing about people who think they've staged a coup is that they never ask who wrote the Constitution, do they? I glanced up at the clock again, not for the time but for the date, because there is a particular pleasure in anniversaries, and my husband's voice, gone 15 years but still loud in memory, said, clear as day, You'll know when to use the key. The key was never metal. The key was a paper with numbers and clauses and a signature that has survived termites and greed. Do you want me gone? I asked, and the question was a velvet glove over a mailed fist. How many times had I given them the chance to choose kindness and they had chosen performance instead? Yes, Aisha breathed triumphant, already tasting the scene she would describe to her friends in bite-sized cruelty later. And Daniel didn't say the word but his silence wrote it on the wall. Then consider this my last supper in your company, I replied, and I folded the dish towel and set it down, and walked out of the kitchen with my head high, my spine straight, the way my mother taught me to leave rooms that don't love me. Isn't dignity a kind of thunder that doesn't bother making noise? The hallway to my suite was long, the runner carpet soft beneath my feet, framed photographs marching along the walls, birthdays and Christmases and a summer in Devon, each one a relic now, and I felt grief and love fight inside me like old lions who refused to die. In my sitting room, the antique secretary desk waited with patient elegance, its tiny brass keyhole winking, and I opened the hidden compartment my lawyer had shown me years ago, behind the false row of Dickens novels. Why do we hide the most powerful things in places that look like stories? There, in a sealed envelope, lay the original letter of wishes and the trustee's contact card, and a second envelope addressed, in my careful hand, to Daniel, for the day when he remembered who he was or regretted who he had become. I set that one aside. My fingers did not tremble as I dialed the number that lives in the spine of the mansion like a quiet guardian, the number I swore I would never use unless my home became a place of harm instead of haven. What is a fortress for if not to shut the gate when wolves come wearing silk? Good evening, Mrs. Cole, came the measured voice of Mr. Lang, who had handled the trust since my husband's last summer. Forgive the hour, I said, and I told him what had happened with the calm of a teacher writing the day's lesson on the board, and he listened with the kind of silence that makes room for decisions. He reminded me of Clause 7 and Clause 9 and the emergency powers attached to health and dignity, and he did not ask me if I was sure, because men who have watched women build empires know we count the cost before we step. Isn't it beautiful when the path you laid in prudence becomes the bridge you need in crisis? Shall I proceed? He asked, and I looked out of the window at the garden my husband and I planted with our first good year, lavender and roses, the olive tree we got on discount and coaxed into splendor, and I felt my heart bruise and harden at the same time. Proceed, I said, tasting both loss and liberation, and in that word I moved my love from the past tense to the self. If the price of peace is the end of pretending, will you pay it when the bill arrives? I hung up and the house felt different, as if the walls had rolled their shoulders and remembered their true name, and I heard footsteps in the hallway, quick, irritated, careless, the sound of people who believe a door will always open for them. I folded the trustee letter back into its place and slipped the card into my cardigan pocket, and then I turned toward the door as it swung open without a knock, and Aisha filled the frame like a queen in a cheap play, Daniel behind her, scowling as if he had just remembered he was supposed to. What do you think they saw in my face that made them hesitate? Where do you think you're going with your little secrets? Aisha asked, and Daniel added, Don't start anything you can't finish, Mum, and the word Mum scraped like sandpaper, and I smiled, not kindly but cleanly, and walked past them toward the stairwell that leads not down to the kitchen but up to the small oak-paneled room at the top of the house where the safe hums like a loyal beehive. When the first lock clicked and the second turned, I remembered my husband saying, Make it quiet, Maggie. Quiet wins wars. Can you hear the quiet right now? Gathering like rain before it breaks. I opened the safe, lifted out the slim leather folder, and held in my hands the power they never imagined I still possessed. The deed retained in trust, the occupancy license revocable at will, the letter to the house manager instructing immediate changes to access. I felt the mansion inhale the way a stage inhales before the curtain lifts, and I knew by morning the gates would not recognize their car tags, the codes would be changed, and the staff instructed to await only my direction. Will they understand before dawn that the house they tried to turn into a throne never belonged to their cruelty? Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed 10, soft and inexorable, and I heard them on the landing whispering furiously, realizing that someone had shifted the axis of the night, and I slid the folder into my handbag and walked back toward them with the ease of a woman visiting her own garden. You look pleased, Aisha said, suspicion licking at her words, and Daniel's jaw tightened, his bravado slipping like a mask that doesn't fit. Can a woman look like sunrise when she's walking through midnight? I was just thinking, I said, that we should all have an honest breakfast in the morning, something simple, perhaps toast, and I smiled in a way that made Aisha step back without meaning to, because even wolves remember fire. Then the intercom crackled to life, unexpected at this hour, and the security guard's voice came through, respectful and a little breathless. Mrs. Cole, I've received an urgent instruction from Mr. Lang regarding access protocols. Do you want these implemented now? Tell me, my dears. Shall we flip the switch tonight, or should we give them one last hour to pretend? The intercom static still hung in the air when I pressed the button and said, yes, implement them now. The guard confirmed, and I knew that in that very moment, the roots of the house shifted, like a tree quietly reclaiming its land from the weeds strangling it. Daniel and Aisha froze, their faces flickering between disbelief and rage, as if they had just seen the ground crack beneath their feet. Isn't it strange how quickly power can evaporate when it never truly belonged to you in the first place? You can't do that, Daniel snapped, stepping forward. His voice carried the authority of a son who believed his mother would always back down. But I didn't move, not even a blink. I already did, I replied. The calmness in my tone was a mirror. He saw himself reflected in it and hated what he saw. Aisha clutched his arm, whispering something sharp into his ear, but her eyes stayed locked on me like a hawk circling prey it suddenly realized wasn't weak. What happens when a predator discovers the lamb has been a lion all along? Daniel tried again, louder this time. This is our home now. We've lived here for years. You can't just... I cut him off with a raised hand. You lived here because I allowed it. Don't confuse charity for ownership. My words sliced through the air, and I saw the color drain from Aisha's face. Her arrogance cracked, but only for a second before she smirked again, that smirk that had tormented me for years. Why do people always think a smile can cover their trembling? I left them standing in the hallway, confused and shaken, and went back into my suite. My heart was beating, but not out of fear, out of release. For too long I had watched their disrespect grow, tolerated the little insults, the dismissive laughs, the way Aisha always rearranged the dining table so that I sat at the far end like some forgotten relic. And Daniel, he encouraged it. My boy, my only child, had laughed at the sight of me humiliated. A bitter ache rose in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Isn't grief just love with nowhere left to go? I sat on my bed, the silk coverlet cool under my palms, and thought back to the beginning. Back before the insults, before the laughter at my expense. I thought of the day Daniel first brought Aisha home, the glow on his face, the pride in his voice. I had welcomed her with open arms, served her tea in my best china, and told myself this was the daughter I never had. I gave them the mansion to live in because I thought it would help them build a family, thought it would anchor Daniel to his roots, thought it would keep me close to them. Don't we all make mistakes in the name of love? But slowly I began to notice the change. Aisha didn't want me at family gatherings. My voice was dismissed, my advice ridiculed. She would whisper to Daniel in front of me, her eyes flicking with disdain, and Daniel would nod, laugh, or worse, join her. I swallowed it at first, telling myself it was small, telling myself I was imagining things. Mothers do that, don't we? We excuse, we justify, we forgive. But each little cut adds up until you realize you're bleeding out. Have you ever excused someone so long that you wake up drowning in their disrespect? The lowest blow came when I overheard them in the garden, standing under the very olive tree my husband and I planted. Aisha said, "Why do we even let her stay here? This is our house now." And Daniel replied, "Let her be. She'll be gone soon enough. Old people don't last forever." Those words pierced me deeper than any insult could. My son had already buried me in his heart while my body still drew breath. How do you mourn someone who is still alive, but no longer sees you as theirs? It was that night I had pulled out the trust papers and read them over and over, reminding myself that I had built safety nets for moments like this. My husband and I had always planned for every scenario. Life had taught us that families can turn, that greed can sprout even in the soil of love. But I never thought it would be my son standing across from me in that greed. Isn't betrayal always most bitter when it comes from the one you nurtured? I thought of my husband again. His laugh, the way he always believed in preparing without boasting. He had insisted we lock the mansion under my name, tied in trust, not as a sign of mistrust of Daniel but as protection for the future. "You never know, Maggie," he'd said, his hand warm on mine. "You never know." Now I knew. I wished he had been alive to see what his foresight had saved me from. Do you think the dead smile when the living finally understand their wisdom? Back in the present, the sound of Daniel's voice cut through my thoughts. He was downstairs now, arguing with the guard through the intercom. I heard him shouting, heard the panic creeping in as the guard firmly repeated, "I'm under Mrs. Cole's instructions. Your access is no longer valid after midnight." Midnight. The word sounded final, like a church bell tolling. What happens when the clock strikes and the doors close for good? I got up, brushed down my nightgown, and went to the balcony. From there I could see Daniel pacing, his hands clenched, Aisha beside him, gesturing wildly. They looked like strangers caught in a storm they never saw coming. And I, standing above, felt a strange calm wash over me. This was not revenge. This was reclamation. A mother taking back what she had given, because it had been weaponized against her. Sometimes reclaiming isn't cruelty, it's survival. Then Aisha tilted her face up toward me, her eyes sharp as daggers, and shouted, "You'll regret this, old woman." Daniel didn't stop her this time. He only glared at me, silent, but his silence was worse than her words. It said everything, that I was no longer his mother in his eyes, only an obstacle. My chest tightened, but I did not flinch. Instead, I whispered into the night air, "You'll regret underestimating me. Can you feel it? The storm has only begun to gather." And just then, the phone on my nightstand rang again. Mr. Lang's voice came calm and steady. "Mrs. Cole, by dawn, the transition will be complete. But, you should know they may try something tonight. Are you prepared?" Prepared. The word echoed. Was I? Tell me, dear listener, what would you do if the people you raised became the wolves at your door before sunrise? Prepared. That word echoed in my head long after Mr. Lang hung up. I stood by the balcony rail, staring down at Daniel and Aisha still fuming by the garden. Their shadows stretched long by the moonlight. My heart should have been pounding, but it wasn't. Instead, it felt steady, like an old drumbeat guiding me forward. Age teaches you that panic is wasted energy. What matters is resolve. Still, one question clung to me like smoke. What would they do before morning? I pulled the curtains shut and walked back to my desk, my hands tracing the polished oak. I opened the drawer where I kept a journal, leather-bound, faded at the edges. It was full of letters I had written to my son over the years. Letters I never gave him. Letters reminding him of the boy he once was, the boy who pressed daisies into my palms after school, who cried when he lost his first dog, who once told me, "Mom, I'll always take care of you." If I read those letters out loud tonight, would he even recognize himself in them? Or would he laugh, the way he laughed when Aisha spat in my soup? Isn't it terrifying when the person you raised becomes a stranger overnight? I closed the journal gently and slid it aside. Then I went to the wardrobe, pulled out a box from the top shelf, and set it on the bed. Inside lay my husband's old revolver, unfired since the day he passed, cleaned every year on his birthday, because I promised him I'd keep it ready if ever the house became unsafe. My hands hovered over it. I didn't want to use it. I prayed I wouldn't have to. But the very act of knowing it was there brought me comfort. Sometimes, safety is not in firing a weapon but in letting danger know you won't cower. Would they dare come for me if they believed the old woman was unarmed? Downstairs, a door slammed. My ears sharpened like a hound's. I moved closer to the staircase landing, keeping to the shadows. Aisha's voice rose, dripping with venom. "She's bluffing. She can't just throw us out like that. We'll see who really runs this house by morning. Daniel's voice followed, lower but sharper. Calm down. We'll handle it. There's more than one way to win. Their whispers tangled like snakes. What did he mean by handle it? I went back to my room and locked the door. My mind wandered to the past again. To the day my husband and I signed the trust deed. We were sitting in our lawyer's office, sunlight streaming through the blinds. My husband, steady as ever, looked at me and said, "Maggie, this house must always be yours, even if love betrays you." I laughed then, dismissing the thought. Betrayal felt impossible. Love was eternal. Or so I believed. Isn't hindsight the cruelest tutor, always teaching after the exam? I paced the room, feeling both old and newly alive. Every insult they had thrown, every time Aisha rolled her eyes, every time Daniel chose her over me, it all came rushing back. But so did the memories of triumph. Raising Daniel after my husband's sudden death. Expanding the business. Building this mansion brick by brick. Sacrifice by sacrifice. I was not weak. I was not disposable. I was Margaret Cole. And this house had my fingerprints in its very foundation. Why should I tremble before tenants who mistook themselves for kings? The clock ticked past midnight. My phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Lang. Protocols complete. Their access revoked. Security instructed. It's done. The mansion was mine again, in every legal and physical sense. Relief washed through me like rain after drought. But with it came fear. Fear of what they might do when they realized the gates wouldn't open for them in the morning. Would they scream? Would they beg? Or would they strike back? I tried to rest, but sleep evaded me. Every creak in the house sounded louder. I sat in the armchair by my bed, clutching my rosary beads, whispering prayers my mother once taught me. "Deliver us from evil," I murmured over and over, as if each word built another layer of armor around me. But prayers can only protect the soul. What about the body? Then came the sound I dreaded. Soft footsteps outside my door. Aisha's voice, hushed but sharp. "She's awake. I can hear her pacing." Daniel replied. "Then we wait. She can't hide forever." They thought I was hiding. No, I was preparing. But how long could I keep the facade? Suddenly there was a knock on my door. Firm, deliberate. Daniel's voice followed. "Mum, open up. We need to talk." His tone was sweetened, dripping with false concern. The same tone he used as a child when he broke a vase and tried to convince me the cat had done it. But now the stakes were no vase. Now it was me. I didn't answer. I stood perfectly still, my shadow stretching long on the wall in the dim lamplight. Silence became my shield. The knock came again, harder this time. "Mum, don't make this harder than it needs to be." And just as I steadied my breath, the doorknob rattled, then turned. My heart froze. They had a spare key. "Tell me, what would you do if the very people you loved most were trying to force their way into your room in the dead of night? Would you beg? Would you scream? Or would you show them what survival looks like?" The brass knob twisted, metal grinding softly against metal. My hand flew to the nightstand drawer, where the revolver lay nestled in velvet. I didn't pull it out, not yet. But I rested my palm over it, steady, reminding myself that sometimes presence was more powerful than action. The latch on the door clicked but did not release. Thank God I'd locked it earlier. I heard Daniel's curse through clenched teeth. "She locked it." "Of course she did." Aisha hissed back. "Kick it in. She's old. What can she do? We need those papers before she hides them." Papers. My throat tightened. So they knew. Or at least suspected. Greed is a strange disease. It makes people sniff out secrets like bloodhounds. The door shuddered once, then twice under Daniel's weight. My spine straightened. I remembered the classroom days when I stood before 30 unruly teenagers, taming chaos with nothing but presence. This was no different, except the stakes were life, dignity, and home. Isn't it odd how age steals your speed but sharpens your steel? Daniel, I called, my voice cutting through the wood. It startled them into silence. If you take one more step, you'll regret it. For a heartbeat, there was stillness. Then laughter. Daniel's bitter, mocking laugh, the same one from the kitchen. Or what, Mum? You'll ground me. You'll write me another sermon in your diary. His words sliced, but I refused to bleed in front of him. Instead, I opened the drawer fully and drew out the revolver. The metal was cool, solid. I didn't point it at the door. I just cocked the hammer back, the sound loud and sharp in the quiet room. That single click silenced them better than any sermon. Have you ever noticed how truth and steel make the same kind of music? You're bluffing, Aisha spat, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. She wasn't as certain as she wanted to be. She wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? You both forget, I said slowly, that this house was built by my hands and guarded by my name. You've played your games long enough. Midnight came and went. Your reign ended with it. Step back before you lose more than a roof. I imagined their faces. Daniel's confusion warring with guilt, Aisha's fury twisting her beauty into something sharp and ugly. They whispered again, too low for me to catch. Then the footsteps retreated down the hall, quick, angry. Relief rushed over me, but only for a moment. I knew this wasn't the end. Wolves don't leave the fold just because the shepherd shows her staff. They circle back. They always circle back. I sat in the armchair again, revolver resting across my lap, and let my mind drift backward. To the first night Daniel and Aisha moved into the mansion. I had cooked roast lamb, laid the table with my finest china, even ironed fresh linens for their room. Aisha had smiled then. Oh, how warm she had seemed, and kissed my cheek, calling me Mum with honey in her voice. That night, I went to bed believing my son had married a blessing. Isn't it cruel? How masks can be worn so well that even love can't see past them. Over the months, the honey turned to vinegar. She started making little comments. This furniture feels so outdated. Or why do you still keep those ugly curtains? I brushed them off, telling myself she was adjusting. But then came the sharper ones. You should stay upstairs, Mum. The guests want space. And Daniel would nod, even laugh. I told myself it was just youth, just arrogance. But arrogance feeds on tolerance until it becomes entitlement. Do you know how heavy silence grows when you let disrespect go unchecked? Tonight, the silence had finally broken. And though I was alone in my room, I felt less lonely than I had in years. Taking back the mansion wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who I was. The clock struck 1. I hadn't realized how much time had passed. My eyelids burned, but I didn't dare close them. Then, faintly, I heard movement again. Not outside my door, this time from the garden. I crept to the window, careful not to silhouette myself against the curtains. Down below, Daniel and Aisha stood with 2 suitcases at their feet, their phones glowing in their hands. I could just make out Aisha's sharp whisper. Call the lawyer. Call the police. Call whoever you have to. She can't win. Police. My stomach clenched. Of course, they'd try to paint me as senile, unfit, maybe even unstable. The world always doubts the old before the young. But the trust papers were ironclad. I knew it. Still, a smear on my name could drag me through hell before the truth shone. I turned from the window, pacing the room, clutching the revolver tighter. Should I confront them? Should I wait for morning when the staff and security would make my power visible, undeniable? Every choice felt like a coin toss between peace and escalation. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from Mr. Lang. Mrs. Cole, I've contacted the local authorities and sent them the legal documents in advance. If they try to involve the police, you'll be protected. Hold your ground. Protected. The word felt like bomb. I sat back down, heart calmer. Yet part of me still ached. Not because of fear, but because of Daniel. My boy. My miracle. Standing outside, plotting against me as though I were a stranger. How had love rotted into this? When did laughter at the dinner table become laughter at my pain? And just as the thought weighed heavy in my chest, I heard it. A crash. glass shattering from downstairs. They weren't leaving. They were breaking back in. Tell me, if you were sitting alone in your room with betrayal downstairs clawing its way back into your home, what would you do? Fight, flee, or wait for the dawn to reveal who the true master of the house is? The sound of shattering glass echoed through the mansion like a scream. My body stiffened, the revolver heavy in my hands. For a moment, all I heard was the pounding of my own heartbeat, steady yet sharp, like a war drum in the distance. They hadn't left. They had chosen violence. Isn't it terrifying, how quickly desperation can turn loved ones into intruders? I rose from the armchair and moved toward the hallway, my slippers silent on the polished floor. My mind sharpened, teacher's instinct kicking in. Observe, assess, act. I stopped at the top of the staircase, peering down into the dim glow of the chandelier. Shadows moved near the living room. Daniel's tall frame, shoulders tense. Aisha's silhouette, arms flailing as she barked orders. Check the study. She must have hidden the papers there. Papers. Always the papers. They weren't thinking of me, of family, of blood. Just ownership. Control. The mansion was their prize, and I was the obstacle. I wanted to weep, but tears would blur my sight. Instead, I held my ground, whispering under my breath. Not tonight. Not ever again. Have you ever realized in a single moment that weakness is no longer an option? I watched as Daniel yanked open drawers, tossing books and trinkets aside. My son, the same boy who once begged me to read bedtime stories, was tearing apart my living room like a thief. And Aisha, her voice rising, shrieked, "Hurry! Before she calls someone." They didn't know Mr. Lang had already secured everything. They didn't know the law was on my side. But law means little to people drunk on greed in the middle of the night. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed security. The guard answered instantly. "Mrs. Cole." "They've broken in through the back," I whispered, my eyes never leaving the chaos below. "Stay close. Don't enter yet. Let them believe they're free. I want them caught in the act." "Yes, ma'am," came the firm reply. Relief steadied me. Reinforcements were near. But still, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. What mother calls security on her own child? And yet, what choice did I have? What lesson do you teach a son who spits on the hands that raised him? Suddenly, Daniel's gaze lifted. His eyes met mine across the staircase. For a split second, time froze. I saw the boy he once was, wide-eyed, vulnerable, but then it vanished, replaced by a hardness that cut me deeper than any blade. "She's up there," he shouted. "She has them." Aisha spun toward me, her face twisted in fury. "Give us the deed, Margaret, or so help me." She didn't finish. She stormed toward the stairs, Daniel at her heels. Their footsteps thundered, the banister rattling under their grip. I raised the revolver. The metal gleamed under the chandelier's glow. "Don't take another step," I said, my voice calm, steady, absolute. The teacher in me again, commanding a classroom gone wild. Daniel froze halfway up, staring at the weapon in my hands. His mouth open, closed. Finally he whispered, "Mum, you wouldn't." "Wouldn't I? I brought you into this world," I said, my throat tight. "Don't tempt me to remind you whose blood built this house." The silence that followed was suffocating. Aisha scoffed, but I saw her step back ever so slightly. Daniel's fists clenched, his jaw working as though grinding down regret. "All this," he muttered, "for bricks and stone?" "No," I whispered. "For respect. For dignity. For every time you laughed while I was humiliated in my own home." Aisha sneered. "You're just an old woman clinging to memories." "Daniel, take it from her. She won't do it." Daniel hesitated. His eyes flickered between me and Aisha, torn between obedience to his wife and fear of his mother. The tension snapped like a bowstring, and in that instant, the front door burst open. "Police!" The shout boomed through the mansion, heavy boots stomping across the marble floor. Mr. Lang had done more than call security. He had summoned the law itself. Daniel stumbled back, Aisha's face draining of color. Officers flooded the hall, flashlights cutting through the dark. One of them barked, "Step away from Mrs. Cole immediately." Relief coursed through me, but so did sorrow. This was what it had come to. My own son standing in the light of police flashlights, my daughter-in-law cursing under her breath. Isn't it tragic when protection feels like punishment for the very ones you once protected? The officers advanced, separating us. Aisha screamed, "This is our house." She's senile. She doesn't know what she's doing. Her lies tumbled out like cheap coins, desperate and hollow. But the officer shook his head, lifting the documents Mr. Lang had sent. According to these, the property belongs solely to Mrs. Margaret Cole. "You're trespassing. Trespassing." The word echoed through the halls, slamming into them like a verdict. Daniel's shoulders slumped, his face pale. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He just stood there, broken, as if the ground had given way beneath him. I lowered the revolver, my hand trembling now that the danger had passed. My knees felt weak, but I refused to collapse. Instead, I whispered into the silence, "The house remembers its master." The officers began escorting Daniel and Aisha toward the door. Aisha thrashed, shrieking curses, while Daniel's silence burned deeper than any words. My heart cracked as I watched them go. This was not triumph. This was survival. And just as the door shut behind them, sealing me alone once more in the mansion's vast silence, my phone buzzed with one last message from Mr. Lang. "It's done. They can't come back. But be warned, Aisha will not stop here. She has plans." Plans. I sank back into my chair, staring at the revolver in my hands. What more could she possibly do now that the house was no longer hers to touch? Tell me what's more dangerous. The enemy you banish from your home, or the enemy who plots from the shadows, waiting for another chance to strike? The house was quiet again, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. The police had gone, their taillights fading down the driveway. Daniel and Aisha had been driven away, their angry voices swallowed by the night. And yet, instead of peace, the mansion hummed with unease, as if it knew the battle wasn't over. Isn't it strange how victory can taste so bitter when it comes at the cost of blood ties? I sat back in my chair, revolver still in my lap, staring at the front door. My chest ached, not from fear this time but from grief. Daniel's silence as they led him out replayed in my mind like a haunting melody. He didn't plead. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look at me. My boy was gone, replaced by a man who had chosen greed over his own mother. How do you mourn someone who is still alive but no longer yours? I rose slowly and walked through the house. Each room bore the scars of their rampage. Drawers overturned, books scattered, glass shattered on the marble. My fingers traced the gouges in the wood, the broken edges of a vase I'd cherished since my wedding day. Aisha's chaos had left its mark everywhere, like a storm that raged not to destroy but to humiliate. Isn't that what cruelty always craves? To leave you surrounded by ruins of what you once loved. When I reached the study, I stopped cold. The safe stood wide open. The leather folder was gone. My blood turned to ice. Hadn't I locked it back? In my rush, in the noise and fury, I had left it unlatched. And they had found it. My hands shook as I pulled the drawers apart, searching, praying it wasn't true. But it was. The folder containing copies of the trust, letters from my husband, the spare key documents. They had taken them. I steadied myself against the desk, the room spinning. They didn't need the originals, they just needed leverage. With those papers, Aisha could twist the story, spin lies to anyone willing to listen. Perhaps not enough to win legally, but enough to stain my name in the eyes of the world. How many battles are lost not in courtrooms but in whispers and rumors? The phone rang, jolting me. Mr. Lang's voice came calm but urgent. "Mrs. Cole, I just received word. Aisha contacted a journalist friend. She's threatening to leak a story about you being unfit, unstable, dangerous. She claims you waved a gun at your own son." I closed my eyes, gripping the receiver tighter. She exaggerates what she forced me to do. I know, Mr. Lang said. But public opinion is cruel. Even with the trust protecting you legally, reputations are fragile. If she controls the narrative, the damage could be irreversible. Reputation. That word hit me like a blow. For 71 years I had built a life of dignity. Teacher, wife, mother, landlady. To be remembered as unstable. To have my legacy reduced to Aisha's lies. Well, I would not allow it. Isn't legacy the last shield an old woman has to leave behind? Mr. Lang, I said, my voice firmer now. We won't fight her in whispers. We will fight her in the open. Silence, then a soft chuckle. I was hoping you'd say that. He explained the next steps. Press release, affidavits from staff, a statement from the trustees. But even as he spoke, my mind wandered. I thought of the staff, Maria, the cook who had worked for us for 30 years, the gardener who still called me Madam Maggie. They had witnessed the insults, the cruelty. They would testify. My heart swelled with gratitude. Sometimes, family isn't the blood that betrays you but the hands that remain steady when storms rage. Don't you think loyalty shines brightest when it comes from unexpected places? After the call, I returned to my room, exhaustion pulling at my bones. I wanted rest but my mind refused. I replayed Daniel's face in my mind, the conflict in his eyes when I raised the revolver. He had hesitated. He had almost stepped back. Almost. Did that mean a part of him still remembered me, still loved me? Or had I only imagined it, a mother's desperate hope clinging to ashes? I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the mansion's whispers. The creak of the beams, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the wind brushing the windows. All of it wrapped around me like a lullaby. And yet, beneath it all, I felt the chill of a storm gathering outside these walls. Because Aisha wasn't finished. She never accepted defeat. And if she couldn't take the mansion by force, she would take my name. As sleep finally dragged me under, one thought burned in my mind. They may have taken the folder, but they hadn't taken my will. The battle wasn't over. It had only changed arenas. And just before I drifted into uneasy dreams, my phone buzzed one last time with a message from an unknown number. This isn't over, old woman. By the time I'm done, no one will believe a word you say. Tell me, what's more dangerous? An enemy outside your gates, or one already inside the hearts of those you love? Morning came with a sky the color of steel, gray and heavy, as if even the heavens were bracing for the fight ahead. I woke before dawn, my body aching but my mind sharp. The message from that unknown number still burned on my phone screen. I didn't need to ask who sent it. Aisha's venom had a signature of its own. Isn't it unsettling how some voices can echo even in silence? I dressed carefully, choosing a deep blue gown that once belonged to my mother. Strong fabric, simple lines, clothing that whispered dignity instead of shouting wealth. If Aisha wanted to paint me as unstable, I would show the world a woman unshaken. Sometimes the battle is not in what you say, but in how you stand. Downstairs, Maria, my loyal cook, was already preparing breakfast. She looked up from the stove, worry etched into her face. Madam, I heard what happened last night. Are you all right? I forced a small smile. I am Maria. But things may get worse before they get better. She set down her spoon, her eyes fierce. We all saw how they treated you. If anyone asks, I'll tell the truth. They spit in your food, they insulted you, they laughed at you. You've always treated us like family. We will not let them destroy you. Her words warmed me more than the tea she poured. Loyalty like that cannot be bought. It is earned through years of kindness. I thought of the gardener, the chauffeur, the house staff. Each one had witnessed my humiliation in silence, but silence no longer served. Isn't it true that when truth finally speaks, it carries the weight of every quiet witness? The phone rang again, startling us both. It was Mr. Lang. His tone was urgent but steady. Mrs. Cole, the story has already broken. Aisha's friend published an article this morning claiming you pulled a gun on your son, that you're mentally unfit, paranoid, even violent. They're painting Daniel as a victim of your cruelty. My grip on the phone tightened. Did she mention the spitting? The insults? The trespassing? Not a word, he replied grimly. It's all twisted. But don't worry, we'll counter it. I've arranged interviews with trusted journalists. You'll need to speak. Not just legally but publicly. This is now a battle for your reputation. Public. The word sent a tremor through me. I had lived my life quietly, leading schools, building a family, never seeking the spotlight. And now, in my 70s, I was being dragged into a spectacle. Yet what choice did I have? To remain silent was to surrender my name. And names are the last gift the living pass to the grave. Do you see how sometimes silence itself becomes a weapon against you? I agreed to Mr. Lang's plan. Set it up, I said firmly. If she wants the world's stage, then she'll find me standing on it, not hiding in the wings. After the call, I walked through the garden, letting the morning air clear my mind. Dew clung to the roses. The olive tree stood tall, defiant against the gray sky. My husband's memory whispered in every leaf. Stand tall, Maggie. I could almost hear him say. Storms pass, but roots hold. As I sat on the garden bench, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Daniel, alone. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his face pale. For a moment my heart leapt. My son, my boy, had come back. Mother, he said, his voice hoarse. I studied him, wary. What do you want, Daniel? He shifted, shame flickering in his eyes. She's gone too far. I didn't know she would drag the press into this. I didn't want. Cut him off. Didn't want what? Didn't want to hurt me. Or didn't want the world to see it. He winced. I laughed, yes. I let her spit in your soup. I let her insult you. But I didn't know she'd. Stop. My voice was sharper than I intended. Every insult, every humiliation, you stood beside her. You let her do it. You joined her. And now that the world is watching, suddenly you grow a conscience. His face crumpled. I'm sorry. Sorry. A word so small it could barely cover a fraction of the wounds he'd left. My heart ached, torn between the mother who longed to forgive and the woman who knew trust once shattered cannot be glued back whole. Isn't forgiveness the hardest when the wound is still bleeding? Before I could reply, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then cursed under his breath. It's her. She's furious I came here. I turned away, my hands trembling. Then go to her. You've made your choice. But instead of leaving, Daniel knelt before me, the way he once did as a boy, asking forgiveness for some childhood mischief. His voice cracked. I don't want to lose both my wife and my mother. Tell me what to do. Tears burned my eyes. Here was my son, broken between loyalty to the woman he married and the mother who raised him. But could I guide him any more? Could I trust him not to betray me again? As I searched his face for the boy I once knew, I realized the hardest battle wasn't with Aisha. It was with Daniel's soul. Would he rise from the pit he had allowed himself to sink into, or would he drag me further down with him? And then, from behind the garden wall, Aisha's voice cut through the morning like a knife. Daniel, step away from her. She'd come back. Tell me, when a mother and a wife pull at the same man from opposite ends, who does he choose? And what happens to the woman he leaves behind? Aisha's voice tore through the garden, sharp and commanding, like a whip cracking in the morning air. Daniel, step away from her right now. Daniel froze, caught between us. His eyes darted from my face to hers, his jaw tightening. I could see the war inside him, the pull of blood against the chain of vows. Isn't it tragic how a man's soul can be split into two, each half claiming to own him? Aisha marched forward, her heels crunching against the gravel, fury burning in every step. Her beauty, once polished like glass, now looked cracked, jagged, dangerous. I warned you, she hissed at him. If you ever waver, if you ever bow to that old woman, you'll regret it. Her words stung me, but they weren't mine to answer. They were Daniel's. My eyes stayed fixed on him. "Well, son," I said softly, "whose side are you on?" Daniel's hands trembled at his sides. He opened his mouth but no sound came. Aisha saw the hesitation, and like a predator scenting weakness, she pounced. "Think carefully, Daniel. You walk away from me and you lose everything, your life, your marriage, your future. All she offers you is guilt and lectures." Her cruelty was sharp, but what wounded me most was the way Daniel's shoulders sagged under it. My boy, the one I'd raised to stand tall, was now bent beneath her voice. He whispered, barely audible, "Aisha, please." But I had heard enough. I stood, my voice stronger than I felt. "Daniel, listen to me. She will strip you of everything, your dignity, your peace, even your soul. And when she's done, you'll be nothing but her shadow. Look at what she's already made you do to me. Is this who you want to be?" For the first time, his eyes filled with tears. I saw the boy again, the child who once clung to my hand at the school gate, afraid to walk in alone. But before he could answer, Aisha stepped between us, her face inches from mine. "You're finished, Margaret," she spat, venom dripping from every syllable. "The world believes me now. The papers, the public, they all see you as the bitter old woman who lost her mind. And when we're done, even Daniel will see it." Her words might have broken another woman, but I had weathered storms fiercer than her tongue. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "Aisha, storms wash away dirt. And when the sky clears, only the truth remains. Remember that." Her eyes flashed with hatred, but before she could retort, Daniel pushed between us. "Enough," he shouted, his voice raw, desperate. "I can't do this anymore." We both stared at him. His hands shook, his chest heaved. "I can't watch the two women I love tear each other, and me apart. I'm sick of the lies, the manipulation, the disrespect. His voice broke. "I just want peace." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the garden. The wind rustled the olive tree, carrying with it the scent of roses. And then Aisha laughed, a cold, mocking laugh that scraped against my bones. "Peace? There is no peace, Daniel. Not while she's still here." She jabbed a finger at me. "Choose. Now." The world seemed to stop spinning. My heart thudded painfully as I watched him, every second stretching into eternity. His lips parted, trembling, and I braced myself for the answer that would either shatter me or save me. He whispered, "I can't choose." Aisha's face twisted with rage. "Coward!" she screamed. She turned on her heel, storming toward the gate. "You'll regret this, both of you." Daniel called after her, but she didn't turn back. The sound of the gate slamming echoed through the garden like a gunshot. I stood still, my hands trembling, not from fear but from the weight of what had just happened. Aisha had left, but her shadow lingered, thick and heavy. Daniel collapsed onto the bench, burying his face in his hands. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracked, broken. "What have I done?" I wanted to reach for him, to hold him like I once did when nightmares chased him from his sleep. But another voice inside me asked, could I comfort the same son who had laughed while I was humiliated? Could I trust him not to betray me again the moment she returned? "Tell me, if you were me, would you forgive a son who stood silent while his wife spat in your food, or would you let him taste the emptiness he had made you live in?" Daniel sat on the bench, his head buried in his hands, shoulders quivering like a boy caught stealing sweets instead of a grown man who had betrayed his mother. I stood above him, torn in half. Part of me longed to pull him close, to wipe the sweat from his brow as I had when he was small. The other part of me wanted to let him sit there in his shame, to feel the sting of his choices without the salve of my forgiveness. Isn't it strange how motherhood never dies, even when respect does? He lifted his face at last, eyes red, lips trembling. "Mum, I didn't know it would go this far." His voice was fragile, like thin glass about to crack. I looked at him hard, steady. "You knew, Daniel. You may not have known how far, but you knew where it was headed. Every insult, every laugh at my expense, you knew. And you let it happen because it was easier to side with her than to stand up for me. His tears spilled, but tears are cheap when they come after the damage is done. I thought keeping her happy meant keeping the peace. I didn't want to lose her. I almost laughed then, bitter and hollow. And in the process, you almost lost me. The words sank into him like stones, and he hunched lower. I turned away, staring at the olive tree swaying in the morning breeze. That tree had roots so deep, storms couldn't shake it. I wondered if I still had roots strong enough to weather the storm of betrayal. How do you rebuild trust when the foundation has already cracked? Just then, Maria hurried into the garden. Her apron still dusted with flour. "Madam," she said breathlessly, "forgive me for interrupting, but you must see this." She held out her phone, her hands trembling. Took it. On the screen was a video. Grainy, clearly filmed in secret. The headline screamed, "Elderly heiress threatens son with gun over family mansion." The video showed me on the staircase last night, revolver in hand, Daniel frozen mid-step, Aisha's voice shrieking in the background. It was clipped, edited, stripped of context. None of Aisha's spitting, none of Daniel's laughter, none of their trespassing. Only me, an old woman with a weapon against her son. My heart sank. "She recorded it," I whispered. "She planned this all along." Daniel stood, his face draining of color. "Mom, I didn't know she was recording." I turned the phone toward him. "But this is what your silence bought her. Your laughter gave her courage. And now the world sees me as a monster." He staggered back as if struck. "No, I'll fix it. I'll tell them the truth." "Will you?" asked sharply. "When they drag your name into this, when she threatens to ruin you too, will you finally stand for me then, or will you shrink back as always?" He had no answer. His silence was louder than any words. Maria touched my arm gently. "Madam, people are already talking. But those who work here, we saw everything. We'll speak. You are not alone." Her loyalty was a balm, but the wound was deep. I nodded, my voice heavy. "Thank you, Maria. But this war isn't just about truth. It's about who shouts loudest." I looked at Daniel again. "If you want redemption, it won't be in words. It will be in action. Stand with me publicly. Tell them everything. Every insult, every humiliation, every betrayal. That is the only way you can earn my forgiveness." His face twisted in anguish. "If I do that, I'll lose her forever." I stepped closer, my eyes burning into his. "And if you don't, you'll lose me forever." The wind stilled. Even the leaves seemed to wait. Daniel's lips parted, but before he could speak, a loud bang came from the front gate. We all turned sharply. A car door slammed, voices rising. Then, clear as thunder, Aisha's voice rang out. "Margaret Cole, you think you've won. This house will never belong to you alone. I'll drag your name through the mud until no one remembers who you were." I closed my eyes, gripping the rosary beads still hidden in my pocket. She was back, fiercer than ever. And this time, she wasn't coming quietly. "Tell me, if your enemy returned to your gate with the world already watching, would you meet her with mercy, or with fire?" The slam of the gate reverberated through the mansion's grounds like a warning bell. Aisha's voice, sharp and venomous, carried across the garden. "Margaret, come out and face me. Let the world see the witch who holds her own son hostage." I rose slowly from the bench, my body stiff but my resolve firm. Daniel hovered at my side, torn, trembling, caught between the two women who had become his battlefield. Isn't it cruel how some men become soldiers in wars they themselves allowed to begin? I stepped toward the house, each footfall measured. Maria trailed me anxiously, whispering prayers under her breath. Through the tall front windows I saw her, Aisha, standing just beyond the gates with two men holding cameras, their lenses glinting in the morning sun like rifles aimed at my dignity. She had come prepared, not to fight me in the courts but in the court of public opinion. "Open the door." The morning air hit me, cool and sharp. "What is it you want, Aisha?" I called out, my voice carrying with the strength of years of teaching unruly classrooms to sit still. She smirked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. What I want: justice. The world will know how you abused your power, waving a gun at your own son. You're unfit, Margaret. This mansion should belong to Daniel and me. Not some bitter old woman who can't let go of the past. Her words dripped with poison, designed to pierce not just me but the hearts of anyone who heard them. The cameras zoomed closer. She wanted spectacle. She wanted the old woman trembling, broken, silenced. But trembling is not the same as falling. Have you noticed how wolves always mistake quiet for weakness? I took a step forward, my spine straight as the olive tree in the garden. If you came here for lies, then keep your cameras rolling, I said. But if you came here for truth, you'll need to let everyone hear it, including the servants who saw you spit in my soup, the neighbors who heard you scream insults across the lawn, the staff who witnessed you and my son tearing apart this home. Shall I call them out one by one? A murmur rose from behind me. Maria had already summoned the house staff, and they now stood at the doorway. Cooks, gardeners, cleaners, faces set, eyes firm. One by one they nodded. Loyalty gathered like an army around me. Aisha faltered, but only for a heartbeat. Then her smirk returned, fiercer. Words of servants. Who will believe them over me? Over your own son. That was the moment Daniel's breath caught. He looked at me, then at her, then at the cameras. I could see the battle raging in his eyes, tearing him apart. Finally, with a voice hoarse but loud enough for the world to hear, he spoke. They'll believe me, he said. Aisha spun on him, disbelief twisting her features. What are you doing? Daniel stepped forward, closer to the cameras. They'll believe me because I was there. I saw it. I laughed when she spit in my mother's food. I stood by when she humiliated the woman who raised me. I let it happen. But it was wrong. All of it. The words tumbled out, raw and broken, but they struck harder than any lie. The cameramen exchanged glances, recording every word. Aisha's face went pale, then flushed red with rage. You fool, she shrieked. Do you realize what you've done? You've ruined us both. No, Daniel said, his voice steadier now. I ruined myself the moment I chose you over my own mother. Today I take it back. Silence fell over the gates, heavy and absolute. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the sight of a man breaking free from his own chains. Aisha's fury boiled over. She lunged at him, nails outstretched, but the security guard caught her arm, holding her back. You'll regret this, Daniel, she screamed as they pulled her away. You'll regret siding with her. Her voice faded as she was dragged toward the waiting car, thrashing, spitting, vowing revenge. The cameras followed until the gate clanged shut behind her. I stood there, my chest rising and falling, the rosary beads warm in my hand. Daniel turned to me, tears spilling freely now. Mum, I don't expect forgiveness. But I had to choose you. I should have chosen you long ago. I looked at him, my heart torn. The wound of his betrayal was still raw, but his words had been the salve the world needed to hear. Slowly I reached for his hand. Redemption is a long road, Daniel. But today you've taken the first step. His fingers clutched mine, trembling, desperate, like the boy I once carried through fevers in the dead of night. Behind us, Maria whispered. The truth always wins, madam. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The mansion stood tall behind me, its walls scarred but unbroken, just like me. And as the cameras clicked, as the story shifted from lies to truth, I realized something. Aisha might still haunt the shadows, but the house was mine again. Not because of papers or deeds or even the law, but because dignity, once reclaimed, can never be stolen again. Tell me, when all is said and done, is survival sweeter than revenge? Or is survival itself the only revenge worth having?